This conference will now be recorded.
So by now, having attended so many webinars, you must have been aware of the difference between eyesight and vision. Yet again, I am briefly going to talk about this. While I was very new to my practice, having corrected a patient with a glass that made him read 20 by 20 was such a joy. Later, when I started working with pediatric population, I realized how faulty my understanding was. So before understanding what's the difference between vision and eyesight, I'd like to discuss what actually eyesight is. Eyesight is a physical attribute of vision. It emphasizes on the structure, pathology, and measurement of the function of the eye. It measures how sensitive your eyes are to find out the details of the distance. On the contrary, vision is the ability to interpret and understand the information that comes through the eyes, and then you execute it to an appropriate response. So vision is a dynamic process that you learn right from your birth. It's not that once you understand or you are of the age where your cognition is getting better, then that's how you learn seeing things properly. It's not that. Your vision starts right from the birth. So since it is a dynamic process to identify and organize and interpret the information that you have achieved through your sensory and motor system, this information is then generated by other senses to derive meaning, and then you direct your motion in the same way. So unlike eyesight, there are other visual skills that are responsible for calling your visual system into a functional one. To clarify this in a better way, let us take an example. Say you are driving in a car, your ability to see the number plate that of the car that is approaching towards you is something that is attributable to its sight. So let us suppose if you are able to see the number plates clear enough, then that is responsible, like you can say that it's like your vision is your sight is proper. But then if you do not understand how far how you have to speed up or how you have to decline your speed, or whether you have to steer your car accordingly or you have to put your brakes on in regard to the approaching car, then this is what is attributable to the vision. So you are directing your motion of your car, whatever you have seen is in like the sight of approaching car, and then moving your directions or orientation as far as the thing that you have learned from the environment is what vision is. So even if we say like you have corrected your patient 2020, it doesn't guarantee that the patient's vision is functional. So since vision is learned and dynamic and is guided by motor and the sensory output, we are responsible for looking not after just the 2020 numbers of the patient, but then the large activities that is attributable to the vision. So coming to the basics of visual perception theory, there are many theories that has been put forward. The two widely accepted theories are bottom-up processing theories and top-down processing theory. The bottom-up processing theory was given by Gibson. It is also known as data-driven processing. This theory supposes that we process the stimuli first and then we analyze it later. As per this theory, we do not require learning. So, like, let us suppose how we can exemplify is in this picture. You see dots here, right? In the picture, in the first picture here. So whenever you just observe, you do not see anything as such. But then when you analyze the small details here, you can finally figure out there is a man with a beard, right? So this says that small quantities or small entities of your stimuli is responsible to make a big picture of it. That is what a bottom-up processing theory is. So this is also known as reductionist theory. Reductionism is an idea where we break down big ideas into the most basic concept. So for example, we can take while interpreting the road signs also, there are different signs in the road which indicates the speed limit, turning, slope, etc. So in this, you are actually not sensing the physical structure that is coming up in your way, right? So you see the signs where it represents the slope, like accident prone areas and all. So without having seen the physical structure, you just get the idea that this physical structure is getting a little slopier, or I have to guide my actions in regard to the signs that I just saw in the road. So this is one of the example of bottom-up processing theory. To the next example is imagining yourself inside a forest. Let us suppose you have come to a forest where you have never been. There are a lot of woods inside, but then even if you have never been to the wood and then you sense some smell of fire, let us suppose. So even if you have not seen where actually the fire is, but then with the smell of the fire or something like the heating up of your limbs and all, you get to know there is some fire next to you, even if you physically do not see the fire. So this is what actually is bottom-up processing theory. Coming to the next, top-down processing theory. This theory was proposed by Richard Gregory. This theory was mainly realized as a response to Gibson's theory. We begin the process of perceiving the world around us by pulling from the perceptual box, which contains experiences, emotions, and memories. It quickly forms as an opinion or judgment, and then we that's what we are seeing and experiencing based on what we have seen or learned from the past. So Gregory proposed that while the eye does take a lot of time to process the stimuli, most of it is lost by the time it reaches to the brain. So we can't possibly construct our entire perception of whatever is just seen in front of us, right? So the whatever fill in the gaps is there, which is lost by processing it from the eyes towards the brain, that is filled up with the help of the memories or things or perception that is already known to us. So in this picture, let us suppose we have the letters that are jumbled, but even if it is jumbled, the first and the last word is in the perfect match, right? So your brain is aware that this, like, since your brain has the inside the perceptual box of your brain, you have this word already set it into, so you do not have any difficulty in processing what actually these letters are in, these words are in the paragraph, right? Similar in the next example, where like you are actually supposed to read the color of the letter, but then you happen to read what actually the word is. This actually is called as Stroop's effect. So in this, even if you are asked to read the color of the text here, we happen to read what actually the letters are written. This is because your brain already has those, and the processing is much faster in the prefrontal cortex. That is why you happen to read out the letters there, read out the words there. So in the corner box example, where you see like what some of you might have observed a old man with a glass, or some of you might have observed a rat. So before I like whatever you observed it for the first time, unless I might have said it's a rat or the vice versa, you might have just perceived it one. But once you remember this picture in the next classes or wherever you get to see this picture, then you get to know that this same picture has two pictures in it. So this is what top-down processing is. So what actually is in the top-down processing is like from the memories box, or from whatever you have learned, perceptually learned from all your past, or that is stored in your brain as an information center, you extract that information and then process it. This is what top-down processing is. So like as we said that eyes are the windows of the soul, and lenses are the windows of our visual behavior. Since vision is learned and the learning happens throughout our life, it is essential to shape our vision very wisely. The visual behavior is malleable and it depends on the number of factors. A.M. Skeffington is one of the eminent faculty in behavioral optometry, and he is also considered as father of behavioral optometry. He once said, if you cannot see 100%, we can't be 100%. So this theory is proposed by Skeffington, consists of 4 circles. The first circle is anti-gravity. This circle The first circle is anti-gravity. The first circle is considered as the first step towards the vision. It encapsulates all the answers of the question that is related to where am I and where are my body parts in reference to the other body parts of me. So how do you gain the knowledge of yours in existence in the space? There are two ways. The first is through the semicircular canals, and the second is proprioception. Yeah, Kapil?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I guess we are going so fast. Can we be a little bit slow?
Is it too fast? Okay, I'll slow down. Sorry. So coming back to anti-gravity again, this is the first circle towards our vision, right? So what happens in this circle is it is responsible for all the fundamental. It answers all the questions that ask us where am I and where my body is in reference to the space. So there are two ways where we gain this information. The first is semicircular canals, and the second is proprioception. My speed is okay, right?
Yes, Didi, yes.
Okay. So semicircular canals are connected to the otolith cells of our inner ears. From this, we derive our positional information, and then we find actually where we are in relative to the gravity. So concepts like accelerations and decelerations are all related to semicircular canals. You might have even felt the turbulence while traveling in the flight, right? This is all because of the vestibular system that is associated with the semicircular canals. The second way where we determine where actually we are in space is proprioception. This also helps in determining or establishing where I am in the space or where my body parts are in reference to the space. The second circle is centering. So once we know where exactly we are and where our body parts are in space, we look forward to know where the other parts are or other objects are in space in relative to us. So centering is everything the person uses to know where something is in reference to themselves. Everything involved in orienting ourselves to the task and coming to balance with the task is as a part of centering. So this is the first precursor towards the fixation and burdens. Let us suppose you are in a corner of a room. You are sitting in a bed in the corner of a room. So your body in reference to the bed is what is anti-gravity. Let us suppose where are your hands in reference to yourself? Is it over your thighs or is it somewhere else? So that is what anti-gravity is. And again, to clarify where you are, where the bed is in reference to the room, where you are in reference to any object in the space is what centering is. So I hope I'm clear to make you all understand what actually is anti-gravity and centering. So this is the first precursor for fixation and burdens. The second is identification. This circle includes everything that a person uses to answer the fundamental question of what is it. So to identify something, we must have a previous experiences with the object, right? So this includes all the meaningful and totally personal experiences that I have with the object of regard. This meaningful concept may be shared by everyone, while your personal experience is solely your own. This is the precursor for accommodative function. So to exemplify it again, let us suppose you want to drink water. You are now seated in the corner of a room and you want to drink a cup of water that is situated in a table that is inside your room alone. So let us suppose where exactly you are, and then you finding out that the thing that is inside on the table is cup, like your personal identification of the cup being cup or cup not being a car is what identification is. Do you follow it? So what exactly is associated with what is it is like your personal experience. It may be you may have a cup that your friend might have gifted. Anything that relates to the memory of a cup is into what is it. So this falls under the circle of identification. The fourth circle is speech or auditory. These circles includes everything that is felt or sensed or stored in and recalled as memories. So whenever you understand this is something like the way you feel this is cup, you have actually communicated with yourself that this is cup. So this is what speech and auditory is. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to communicate with someone else. You can communicate with your personal awareness of cop being a cop not being a car is what speech or auditory is. It is actually a communication, a circle of communication. So it encircles all the questions where which means like, what do I know about it? What can I tell you about it? About this is what this circles relates to. So all the ways we become aware of what we feel, see, hear, taste or smell, and know about the particular stuff is what speech or auditory is. So it may be internal communication, or you communicating with someone else is what speech and auditory circle deals about. So what Skeffington's proposes, out of all these circles, what comes or emerges is vision. So vision can never be associated, or it cannot be taken into isolation, since it comes over the interaction of all these four components. So whenever we take a patient and think that this patient is visually functional, or his visual function is perfectly working, we have to make sure that all these four components are still in harmony. So any limitation in any of these sub-process will result in compromise in the efficiency and then processing ability of the total process of the vision. So whenever we take a patient, the correct way to diagnose any dysfunction in the visual process is to think about how they perform in their personal space. So once you get a patient, then you have to see not just how they see, how they act, how they behave with the anti-gravity, how they center themselves, like how they orient their body postures, how do they know about that thing. Everything is interrelated. So vision is never considered as isolation as per Skeffington's principle, and this is considered a holistic approach of care while you as you work as a behavioral optometrist. So we have two visual pathways. So these both pathways originate from the eyeball and they extend towards the visual cortex and are anatomically separated. The first is magnocellular pathway, otherwise also known as YAM pathway, and the second is parvocellular pathway. So magnocellular pathway is also known as ambient pathway and are named after magnocellular cells. They constitute about 10% of the visual pathways and are responsible for directing our motor movement. It deals with all the spatial and the motor skills and our ambient visions. So let us suppose these magnocellular cells are actually responsible for answering the question that relates to where exactly the particular object is, or a particular object of regard is in the space. So it helps in orienting our body, our whole locomotion based on that. These pathways are like whenever these pathways are found faulty or abnormal, they are like found. They are with research. They are evident that in cases of dyslexia and schizophrenia and other developmental disabilities, they are found that these pathways are defective. The YAM pathway actually has a poor color contrast sensitivity and poor acuity, and they are very much sensitive to movement, and they have low spatial resolution. So whenever you have to deal with something that relates to stereopsis or the spatial localization, figure ground, or anything of that relates to perception, then your YAM pathway is responsible. So the next pathway is parvocellular pathway. These pathways relates to the answer of what is it. So this is a ventral pathway, and it constitutes about 90% of the total visual pathway. So whenever we have to identify any object, like let us suppose any object, like what actually it is, then parvocellular pathway is responsible. So these since they have to work on a proper identification, they have very much sharp acuity, and they have very much sharp strong color sensitivity. So this pathway is actually located in the ventral surface of the brain. So Jean Gettman is a eminent personality in the developmental optometry, where his philosophies on the developmental optometry is regarded very much. So he once said that the fact that an infant must learn how to walk and talk is fully accepted by everyone, but it is also important to know that the infant must be able to learn to see, to feel, and to taste. The machinery for each is present, but he or she also must learn how to use it. So school readiness starts early, and if this is true, life readiness begins at birth. So what actually he meant is, let us suppose, like, when parents are so much okay with child learning their first milestone, but parents has to be okay with kids learning to see as well. They also like to see, or to have a proper vision. Also there are some visual milestone, and unless these milestones are achieved, the child will always have a problem in their daily activities. So vision, since it is a continuous process and that starts right from birth, and it encapsulates so many areas as explained by Skeffington Circle, it is our prime duty to make sure they are visually ready to carry out their task with utmost efficiency. So, like, you might have even experienced as being a practitioner, like your parent, there are so many parents who complains of their child not having good grades as they grow in age. Like, let us suppose they keep saying like he was very good while he was in second grade or first grade, but soon after he started with higher grades like 6th or 7th grade, my child is having problem, his grades are getting lower, he doesn't stand first, or he doesn't stand good in classes, he has problem with attention and all. So have you wondered why does it happen? So it is because while you were a kid or while you were in lower grades, the fonts that are present in the books are quite high. I mean, the quite big size. So as we grow up, we have font size that is equivalent to Unit or something. So when we grow up, the font size these decrease, and that is why it demands a larger amount of visual efficiency and other perceptual skills. So that is why a child, once he grows up, he finds it more difficult to read. So, and the other thing is, like, since vision, like here, vision and learning, as I have mentioned in the slide, is the learning actually refers to the thing that we gain from reading. So since there are so many things that, like let us suppose, how did you know about Pyramid of Pisa? How did you know about the leaning tower of Pisa? So all these things, whichever are considered as universal truth, you read it on your books, right? So what it is said that 80% of learning is visual, and 1 out of 4 students is found to have vision problem that is serious enough to impede his learning. So I didn't mean that other than learning, there are ways other than reading books. There are no ways to learn. There are ways like auditory methods. Through auditory method or through visual, like videos and all, you get to learn things. But then while we consider ourselves as a student, there were so many things that we learned through books. So unless this difficulty that we encounter while reading is not corrected, we'll have this problem throughout our life, and this is again causing a problem that changes the temperament while we live in as well. So it is very much basic to fix this problem as soon as possible. So research even indicates that there are so many, with the reading difficulties, there are coexisting visual and language deficits. So whenever these visual deficits, which are responsible for impeding their educational system, is not corrected, they will obviously have problem with learning, or as in academic learning. So, what do you think? Children actually read to learn, or they actually learn to read? So this reading to learn and learning to read is two different things. Let us suppose if you call yourself, if you call a child who is academically good, he may be working with, he may actually read to learn. But then let us suppose if you consider a child who has problem with reading, so he is actually learning to read. He is actually learning or trying his level best to take. Hello? Am I audible? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that is what it relates to reading to learn and learning to read.
Excuse me, Didi. Okay,
Yeah.
just for a moment. Asmita ji, can you please mute yourself?
Now,
Yes, it's good, Didi. Good.
is it okay now? So
Yes,
having described what is the difference between reading to learn and learning to read, I now want to emphasize that unless the child is able to perform his best in learning to read, he is not able to do reading for learning, right? So these are two connected things, like seeing to learn and learning to see. You should have your hardware fixed properly. Your software should be proper in synchronization to see things. Like software agent, I consider it to a brain, and hardware into eyes. So unless your eye teaming is good, your visual efficiency that relates to accommodation burdens is good, your fixation is not better, or you have other perceptual deficits, the child is never going to learn at its fullest. So you have to make sure before like getting him into school or before loading him into academic things, you have to make sure that he is visually ready to go to school. So failure, what happens in those who have deficit in learning or who have problem with reading is they will have failures in placing the small information and identifying the main theme of a text or making an easy connection with everyday knowledge. Let us suppose if if the child has problem with figure ground, he will always have difficulty in reading things. He will always have problem in comprehending what actually he is reading. So this is a YouTube link where you'll get to see how parents actually react when I'll later post it to the chat box. This video is actually depicting how parents, like simulating how a child see in the classroom. The parents were showed with the help of VR technology, and then they got awestruck how badly their children were struggling in having in the classroom. So again, coming to the same topic of 2020 myth again. So whenever we say like having corrected a patient of 2020 is not ensuring that he is reading or he is not having any problem with his reading skills, because this 2020 correction is done at a distance and it is static, while we require 17 visual skills for learning and reading, and these skills are not tested in our routine eye examination. Just they get you tested for a distance correction, and at times they do not even check in your visual acuity, which doesn't even like ensure that you have a proper efficiency in reading. So whenever we missed visual, whenever we have any binocular vision disorder, then the child or the individual will obviously have avoidance to learn. So even few children, whoever are having problem with binocular vision disorders like convergence insufficiency, or they were even found to have misdiagnosed as ADD or ADHD. There are so many research which is evident of this. So what actually are the symptoms of accommodation and Borgen's deficit? So whenever the individual have asthenopia while reading, or whenever he has headache that starts off with his near visual task, or blurred vision at distance and diplopia, whenever he has decreased attention, or he complains of overlapping words or letter, this signs that, or this is hinting that he has some problem with accommodation and Borgen's. So what actually is hinting you to that the individual is having oculomotor dysfunction? So whenever he complains, he's like whenever he keeps lying while reading, or whenever he keeps omitting and transposing words, whenever he moves his head very much excessively, or whenever he has difficulty in eyeball, like ball playing activities, catching balls and all. So these are like actually the red flags for having the signs of oculomotor dysfunction. So again, coming to visual information processing skills deficiency, we have delayed learning of the alphabet, poor automatic recognition of words. They have difficulty in performing basic mathematic operations. They even have confusion with similar looking words like B and P, B and D, P and Q. So these are the problems that relates with visual information processing skills. So with the so whenever we have seen patient or we go through the symptoms of the patient as described by their parents or by themselves, individual themselves, we know there is something that is lagging in between their skills or visual functions. So what is the good news is all these problems, whatever interferes with their reading and learning, is treatable, and most of the time we fail to even to refer them or do our level best to treat them, and that is why they keep suffering from the same problem, even having visited a number of eye doctors. So in this slide we'll be discussing about the real scenario. This was actually a study done in US where in the fifth grade, in the students of fifth grade, a teacher did this research where she found that 74% of the classroom day is spent in child desk performing his near task. So out of this 74%, only whichever work is only responsible for near point work, like let us suppose only reading or writing at the near distance, it was 54% of those, and out of those were found to have 54%, they were not screened for near distances. So, and out of those 74, 20% of the work involved in near to distance work, and whoever were found to have near distance like out of those individual, 20% were not screened for near distance as well. Are you following this? Hello?
Yes, yes.
So whenever these students were found to have a problem with the near task, like they were done with the research, and then with the distance, 26% of them, like they had 26% of them which were like 26% of the total working hour was involved into the distance tasks, and all were done for this screening distance, because all were screened only for distance, while at near distance, that refers to the facility, and total near point, they were not screened. So what actually is that with the advent of technology and advancement, the education system has also taken leap, right? So while we were a small kid, we used to only gain information only from books or from those whoever like our teachers used to, whatever teachers used to say, we used to get the learning. But now with the advent of advancement, what has happened is each student is facilitated with either a laptop or some screen time things, or any gadgets that relates any gadgets that through which he can gain information. So it's not just book where he is investing time. There are a lot of things like laptops and other gadgets where he is doing most of his near work. So even not just that, like children are even loaded with programs like that is responsible for enriching their grades. Let us suppose we can take parents like in India, like while they are in grade 9 or 10, they are loaded with classes, like they are the parents ask them to go for classes of IIT, right? So even if they are academically ready, but then that again loads the amount of near work they have to do. So with the demand, like with the time or with the competition that is growing with the advent of technology, children or all the students are like loaded or let us suppose they are forced to work more into near activities. So while we were kids, we were like encouraged by parents themselves to go for physical activities or outdoor activities, but the scenario is just opposite now. Like children barely get any time to go for physical activities or outdoors, and then the obsessions and into social media again is a plus factor for individuals investing more time on their near activities. So whenever a child is under stress, he sees less, hears less, and then generally becomes less efficient. This sentence, I hope it is clarified with the same principle of Skeffington's. So whenever he has any deficit in any part of his vision, obviously is all the function that relates to his vestibular part or balancing or him identifying his perceptual environment, everything is impacted because he is living up with the stress or living up with the strain. So with this expectation where children are loaded with lot of near activities, it is very much sure, or it's no wonder that they need help. So now coming into the core topic, what actually are special population? So this refers to the individual who have severe chronic disability that is attributable to his mental or physical or combination of both. He is like disability that is manifested before the patient attains the age of 22, and he is like to the disability, like it refers to the disability which is likely to continue indefinitely. So when there is substantial functional limitation, people with special needs require self-care, they have difficulty in receptive and expressive language, they have problem or requires help in learning, they have problem in mobility and self-direction, they have problem with capacity for their independent living, and they are always dependent on their economic economic sufficiency, or they are not economically self-sufficient. So what it results is the need of combination and sequence of special, interdisciplinary, generic services and supports and other assistance. So this need is actually lifelong, or it becomes for like it extends to a duration where we do not actually know. It may be indefinite or maybe for a particular time period, or they are like planned in such a way that they need a proper care and a interdisciplinary approach for their care. So what is the need of us, or we as an optometrist, to work with this population, or to have an idea how to go with the examination of population? Because like when I worked with this sort of population for long, I found like even if it is not verbally expressed, I found in colleagues of mine like there are sentiments which like even if they are retarded, what's the use of having them to see at their like what's the use of them, or what's the use of them to have a properly corrected vision? So even the literature are evident that they have higher incidence of refractive error, oculomotor dysfunction, binocular vision disorder, perceptual anomalies, and health problems. So these are mostly evident, they are found prevalent in more and they are more prevalent in this population than a typically growing population. So because they are not properly corrected, the quality of life always remains the same, or they always have to struggle. And it is found that if we correct or do our level best from eye practitioners level, the quality of life will obviously improve in this population too. So this is why we need to correct, or from our level best, we have to provide service to them. So coming to the figures, according to the census conducted by Nepal in 2011, out of total population, 1.94% were found to have some kind of disability. So this census was done by 2011, and we do not have any census done after that. So out of these, 36.3 were found to have physical disability, 18.5 were found to have vision disability, 15.4% were found to have hearing disability, 11.5 with speech related, 7.5 with multiple disability, and 6% of them were found to have mental disability. We do not have any research that actually tells or figures out what is the exact population of people who are having conditions of cerebral palsy or autism or anything that relates with neurological disorder or any kind of subspecialties in the special needs. So the rough figures, whatever I could get from NET, I have entitled here. So as far as the few data that I have collected through NET, there we like this is a rough estimate again. So there are 60,000 people with individual with cerebral palsy. So 10,000 to 50,000, that is again rough. Okay, so 10,000 to 50,000 with autism. 350 cases reported till now. That is again not reliable, but then I have just kept it as a rough figure here. Down syndrome with 350 cases. Fragile X syndrome, it is not reported so far, or there is no research conducted, and around 7,20,000 people with mental retardation. Again, mental retardation is an umbrella term for so many neurological disorders. So we can't actually say like it's not segregated into this many had this problem, this many had this problem. So it's again a rough figure. So being an eye practitioner, what do you expect in this sort of population? So learning disability again is an umbrella term for a large number of conditions like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and conditions that associates with visual information processing skill. So what actually is found as far as the research is, they have severe oculomotor dysfunction is in saccades and pursuits. Their saccades and pursuits are very much impaired. They have reduced near point of accommodation, that is again by both binocular and monocular. Strabismus is usually present. They have deficits in visual efficiency skills, as I said. So dyslexia, you must be aware what actually is dyslexia. It is a reading disorder where it is characterized actually by trouble. They have trouble in reading despite of normal intelligence. So they have difficulty in spelling words, difficulty in reading quickly. They have difficulty in writing words, anything that relates with language processing. So what is actually dysgraphia is they have difficulty with handwriting stuff. So let us suppose if they have, whenever they have poor eye-hand coordination, we actually see like individuals with dysgraphia. The parents actually complains, their complaints are more concentrated towards their handwriting stuff. Dyscalculia is anything that relates to the operational maths, and like whenever they have problem in carrying out mathematical calculations. Dyspraxia is something that relates to us the moment. So auditory processing disorder, visual information processing disorder, they all fall under learning disability. So whenever their history acuity was compared with the normal population, they were found more or less the same. So what is autism spectrum disorder? It is again, according to DSM classification, it is a neuro developmental disorder where you like it is actually characterized with stereotypical typical behaviors or repetitive behaviors, and they have very much impaired social communications. Parents actually complaints of having poor eye contact while communication. They do not respond with their name, like respond with calling their names. Like they have very much impaired communication skills too. So whenever research was conducted in this sort of population, their visual acuity was found to be unaffected to moderate. They had moderate deficits. So even our research said that they had vision as good as eagle. So we have very contrasting results as far as their like in regard with their visual acuity. Again, the oculomotor dysfunctions was there, typically saccades and pursuits. They have reduced convergence. They have increased prevalence of strabismus and increased likelihood of refractive error as compared to the normal typically developing population. And again, coming towards their attention, they have very much poor attention. They have hyperactivity disorder. They have crowding, and their visual information processing is very much impaired. Coming to cerebral palsy. So cerebral palsy is a group of disorder that generally impairs the movement. The muscle tone is affected, the posture is affected. So this is actually caused by an abnormal development in the damage of the parts of the brain that is responsible for movement or balance or posture. So we have different types of cerebral palsy. They are spastic, dyskinetic, ataxic, and mixed type. All of them have their individual features of differentiation depending upon the muscle tone or which limbs they are affected, or the amount, the severity where they are affected. They are classified on the same. So the main optometric findings that are found in cerebral palsy are they had low to moderate amount of hyperopia with high myopia in severe cases of cerebral palsy. Their mean acuity was approximately 2 Snellen lines below than the age-matched population. They had oculomotor dysfunction again. Their accommodative, they had problem with accommodation, that is, most of them were found to have accommodative insufficiency. They had reduced visual perceptual abilities, and their peripheral visual defect, as in their peripheral visual system is again impacted. That we found in many of the special need population. So they have again. Yeah.
Excuse me, Divi. Is there any reason like having the high myopia?
No, like it's such. This is based on the study. So there, like depending upon the severity, like in case of CP, we do see some problem that relates to the optic atrophy and all. So age particular, they do not have a particular reason for having high myopia, but then the severity, with the increase in severity, they are found more incident in like whenever they have severe severity, they are found to be incident, like the incidence of high myopia is more. Hello, did it answer you?
Yes, it is.
Shall I continue?
Yes, sure.
So they have reduced visual perceptual abilities. They have peripheral visual defects again, and then the forms of strabismus again is not. They have some forms of strabismus again, but then the incidence of having isomore or exotropia is not mentioned as such with research. They are even evident to found to have cortical blindness or optic atrophy in severe cases. So now we come to Down syndrome. So many of you might have seen cases with Down syndrome as well. So Down syndrome is actually a genetic disorder where which is actually caused by a faulty cell division with either a partial or full addition of a gene in chromosome 21. So they are actually characterized with small head, flattened face, a large telecanthus, protruded tongue, and their stature is actually small. They have smaller limbs as well. So coming with their optometric finding, they have poor near visual acuity than distance visual acuity. They have moderate to high refractive error. They have deficit in that is a lag in accommodation. They have strabismus because of the telecanthus. They are found to be more isotropic than the other form of strabismus. They have poor contrast sensitivity. Blepharitis is more common in this because they are generally prone to have a dry skin. So that is why blepharitis is more common in this sort of population. And in cases like there are cases where we see cases of congenital cataract, keratoconus, nystagmus, and CNLD is very much common in this population. Fragile X syndrome. So I assume many of you might not have heard about this syndrome. So Fragile X syndrome is again a genetic disorder which is characterized by mild to moderate intellectual disorder. So in this, individuals with fragile X syndrome are actually found to have a long face, and the ears are prominently large. The chin is prominent, and they have a very large forehead, and they have a severe intellectual disability. So the main optometric findings in fragile X syndrome are strabismus with equal incidence of issue and exo, significant refractive error. There are no studies so far that is done on accommodation is in the part of lag, facility, or amplitude. There are few case reports that hints of poor oculomotor skills. Again, this is not this research is solely like the oculomotor finding is solely based on a case report. It doesn't. There are no research so far that is based on the like in large population. Only like I took it out from a case report. So few case reports hints of poor oculomotor skills, and from they are even based on the severity, they have mild to severe visual dysfunction as well. So the there are few triads that again resembles to autism. So fragile X syndrome is more to like the behavioral triads are more towards the autism spectrum. So those intellectual disability like whose etiology is not known, they are broadly classified into this heading. So they are actually with the optometric findings in them are like they are most of them are accompanied with another disability. So poor communication resulting under diagnosis of like these are most because they have other problem associated with it. They have poor language processing skills. So they because of the communication skills getting poor, they like are found to have underdiagnosed visual conditions as well. So the impairment of vision is more with increased severity. They have refractive error that is range from high hyperopia to high myopia. They have reduced binocularity as expected, and strabismus as well. The ocular health abnormality including cataracts, optic nerve atrophy, keratopathy, and glaucoma is also expected in this population. The cortical visual impairment. This is one of the leading reasons for causing permanent blindness. So what actually happens is the visual cortex is found to have impacted in the cortical visual impairment. So depending upon the severity, the visual function again differs. Which area of brain is actually a visual cortex, or the other parts of respiration, like we have areas that is responsible for vision, right? So these areas like B1, B2, whichever has been classified based on their function, these areas are found to be in problems. So depending upon the area affected, the severity of CVI is also classified in the same way. So the main refractive findings are the main optometric findings are they have refractive error, impaired accommodation, the color vision is also impacted depending, again it depends upon the area affected. The visual field and attentional attention is always impaired in this. Again, depending upon the area affected, their mobility and navigation is still is also inaccurate. So these are the various type of conditions where we expect the special needs in them. So this is not just this population. We have other population which are considered into special needs population or special population. I deliberately didn't explain traumatic brain injury in this and other conditions like schizophrenia, but then they are also considered into the same population. So so coming towards the primitive reflex. So what are primitive reflex? They are actually the involuntary motor responses that are originated from the brainstem, and they appear as early as in the uterine life, and soon after the birth, depending like till the age of one, maximum of one, they extend. So if at all they are not washed up, they are actually responsible for survival, and if they are not washed up and washed off, then they are found to have impacted the various areas of vision that involves with learning and their mobilities. So the first so they actually are responsible for laying down patterns of neural networks and myelinization of pathways that allows the connection of various areas of the brains. They lay a path actually. So whenever your prefrontal cortex is not very developed, they actually are responsible, with the help of this ventral system, they are responsible for bringing up a neural network. So whenever these areas these primitive reflexes are not integrated, they are responsible for carrying out, like they are responsible for interfering with the learning behavior or communication and their emotional weakness of the individual. So what actually is evident in autism spectrum disorder or any other behavioral issues that relates to a individual, these primitive reflex are found to have not integrated. So we have to, like, whenever we see a patient, we have to make sure that their primitive reflex are also integrated. So what are the causes of retained primitive reflex? The first is forceps delivery or C-section. Whenever there is any problem that associates with forceps delivery, then they are most probable to have retained reflex. The other reasons are when during pregnancy, when there is a history of fall or trauma with the mother, or when there is lack of tummy time, delayed or skipped creeping or crawling, chronic ear infection. Do you know why this factor is considered, the chronic ear infection is considered problematic to have retained reflexes? Because this associates, the ear is associates with your vestibular system. So when you have impaired vestibular system, that again interferes with your mobility and other areas of the brain. The next reason is head trauma or vertebral subluxation. So what is the importance of testing retained reflex? The patient who we have number of patients, like even I have come across number of patients, like even if you see conditions where the patient is very much flexible with his visual outputs from the optometric vision therapy, but after some time they tend to have the same problem, which actually is regressing. So whenever patient keeps complaining about the regress of the same symptoms, or whenever parents report that as long as they study, like my child studies in school, he is able to find out, but soon after he no more is acquainted with that thing, he forgets it. Whenever parents complain of this, or whenever you have to reach whenever you want a child or an individual having some problem associated with their accommodative with their other language or other skills of their behavior to be evidently efficient, that time you have to see if their reflex are integrated, because many of the times whenever there is problem with the reflex integration, they are found to have lagged in the areas of academics or other social interactions. So testing reflex again gives the optometrist a valuable map of sequencing their therapy. So unless you do not make sure that their reflex are integrated, again you are heading yourself into a blind path. So whenever you want your patient to achieve the most out from vision therapy, you have to make sure the patient's reflex are integrated. So I'm going to discuss I'm not going to discuss each and every reflection detailed. I'm not going to explain them in detail, but then what actually I'm doing is what happens if they are not integrated. I'm going to discuss about that. Okay. So what is Moro reflex? The Moro reflex begins to start at 28 weeks of gestation, and then it washes off by 4 months after birth. So this is generally elicited as a reflex at distraction, when the baby is startled by loud noise or bright light. This is also otherwise called as startle reflex. So how is it characterized? As you see in the picture here, whenever the child is exposed to a bright light or a sound which he is not familiar with, there is extension of his arms and legs away from his body, and then whenever soon after he extends it, he gets it back. That's what a Moro reflex is. You can see even in the pictures, right? So what happens when the Moro reflex is not integrated? The child becomes oversensitive or overreactive to sensory, resulting in poor impulse control. There is sensory overload, anxiety, and emotions, and immaturity, and social immaturity. The other behavioral thing that is observed in children who have this Moro reflex that is not integrated, they have motion sickness, they have poor balance, they have poor coordination, and they are very much easily distracted, and they are unable to adapt well to the change or mood swings. So so in case of behavioral problems like in autism and all, whenever we see patient, we have to make sure, like, because these areas are not integrated proper, they are actually having problem with this. That is why they have some behavioral adaptations, like closing their ears, like pushing their ear hard with their fingers, so that they somehow cut off the sensory overload in them. They have other behavioral activities like flapping their hands for proprioception, touching everywhere so that they gain the idea where actually he is in space. So these are all behavioral attributes. Whenever these, whenever the Moro reflex is not integrated, we get to observe is explained, right? So we go to the next slide, rooting reflex. This reflex is characterized by opening of the mouth to follow and root in the direction which you strike. Like, let us suppose if you stroke the corner of the baby's mouth, then the baby will open his mouth. It's shown in the picture. Like, in the same direction he opens the mouth. This is actually responsible for like whenever the baby is fed to breast or bottle feeding. So whenever these reflex are not integrated, they are supposed to be washed up by the age of 4 months after birth. But whenever they do not integrate properly, this results in difficulty with swallowing the solid foods, or they have poor articulation and thumb sucking. These behaviors are actually found in children whose rooting reflex is not integrated properly. The next is palmar reflex. It's shown in the figure. It begins at 32 weeks of gestation and is washed up by the age of 6 months. So whenever this is actually characterized whenever we lightly touch the palm of the baby, they do the reflex flexion of their fingers. They tend to catch your finger like the way it's shown in the picture. So whenever this reflex is not integrated, we expect them to have problem with fine motor skills, or they stick out tongue while writing or exhibit messy handwriting. So whenever you catch your friends doing this, you get to know, like I have many friends even with the same problem of sticking out tongue while writing. So we get to know that these areas or these reflexes are not integrated proper. The next is asymmetric tonic neck reflex. This is also known as fencing reflex, which is characterized by turning of your head on one side, and the arms and legs on the same side will extend while the opposite limbs are bent, like the way the baby, like the way it's shown in the picture. The flexor of the limbs on the same side where he has turned the head, and the other side is followed with contraction of their limbs. So whenever these reflex are supposed to be washed up by 6 months, but if it is not integrated within the same month, it interferes with their reading abilities. So they are supposed to find they are found out to have dyslexia, reading and reading, listening, handwriting, and other spelling difficulties. They have poor sense of directions and lateralities, and they have even problem with focus and balancing difficulties. The other is the spinal gallant reflex. So what happens is like this, it starts with this starts with 3 months to 3 months of the 3 months of gestation, and it gets washed up by 9 months. So this reflex actually, in this reflex, what happens is whenever the baby curve their hip outward, and if you generally like the way the baby is with his hips outward, so whenever you stroke his back, he tend to move his head up. So this is actually a precursor for the child or the small baby to understand what anti-gravity is. So this prepares the babies for movement like crawling and walking. And if these reflexes are not integrated with the definite time period, the children are found to have a problem with bedwetting. They have hip rotation to one side. That pertains to the problem with diet, and then they have difficulty in sitting still, like the kids with hyperactivity have. They have scoliosis where their back is a little curved outside. They have fatigue and poor concentration. They have poor short-term memory, and they have very irritable bowel syndrome. The last one is tonic labyrinthine reflex. So this is supposed to be integrated till 3.5 years. It's shown in the figure. We have two types of tonic labyrinthine reflex, which is forward TLR and backward TLR. When the baby lies on the back, let us suppose it's shown in the figure, the baby's head moves forward and arms and legs are also pulled close up to the body. The way it's shown in the picture. See, so they pull their limbs very closer. And whenever his head is moved outward, as in the picture, there is the flexure of their limbs. So this is the two types of TLR. So whenever this reflex is not integrated, he is found to have problem with balance and coordination. His posture is not correct. He gets easily fatigued. His muscle tone is also weak, or like that is why even when you get the patient, you have to check the muscle tone and like ask with the patient if they are adopting any physiotherapy along. I'll come to this slide. I'll come to this area of multidisciplinary approach again in the coming further in the coming slide. So you see parents complaining their children to have double leg position in the floor, motion sickness, speech auditory difficulties, tendency to have cross-eyed, stiff, jerky movements. They have to difficulty in walking up and down stairs, difficulty in following the directional or movement instruction. These are all related with retained tonic labyrinthine reflex. So you might have observed many children with special needs walking with their toe or walking on their heels. These are all the way they take the proprioception as a measure to find out their orientation in the space. So whenever you see, as you have learned what actually are the behavioral output of not having integrated reflex, what red flags are there as an optometrist, or what red flags you have to observe being an eye practitioner. So whenever parents complain of child using his finger is a marker while reading, whenever he takes his reading material very close to his eye, whenever he has very much problem with concentration or is very much problem with carrying out mathematical operation, whenever his handwriting are as bad as the picture shown in this, where he is not aware of the spatial localization of the letters, or his pencil grip, where he is responsible for holding the pencil, or a pen in his palm is not proper. All these are results of his unintegrated reflex. The way it's seen here, like this picture in the last is how a dyslexic patient sees. They have a problem of letter inversions here. See. So these are all the result of the deficits in their visual processing skills or other areas of visual efficiency. So these are all the other areas where we have to see, like you see this autistic kid here, where he is touching everywhere and walking with his toe. this little boy is flapping his hand. These are all these are all the ways they carry out to have their awareness in the space. This is what we call it a pigeon walking, a duck foot, when there is sensory when there is sensory loading. So this little kid is actually closing her ears. You see how they are holding this. This is actually used in training a proper grip in the while holding a pencil. This is also called as pencil grip, where we work on how to hold a pencil better. So these are like instrument which trains them to hold a pencil better. So like these are the traits where in autism they tend to arrange stuff in line. So these are all the behavioral traits of not having the reflexes integrated proper. So when you see all these conditions of not just seeing their visual acuities or visual efficiency is enough. Even if you see a normal kid, he doesn't who is not complained to have any problem as such with by his parents, you are supposed to look into these factors. So unless you put it all together, you do not get a correct diagnosis of the children or the individual who comes to you. So whenever there is mismatch in the sensory system, that we see abnormal postures in them, they keep stumbling or they keep tripping over things, they keep bumping into things, they have behavioral upsets, avoidance of tasks, and they have difficulty in throwing and catching of stuffs. So these are all the mismatches that a person has whenever he has some deficit in his sensory system. So whenever you see a patient with some behavioral issues, it's not just his vision that is as in sight that is affected. Even if they are found to have 20/20 vision or the considered benchmark of a proper correction, but then they have issues that relates with the other areas of vision. So whenever you see a patient, you have to consider yourself or the individual as a special action system. So whenever he has severe dysfunction, he is observed to have more pronounced behavioral and academic impacts and impacts. So to compensate these inabilities, what we do is we seek a other way that is responsible for providing the same information that his deficient system is doing. So proprioception is one of the kind where they gain the information regarding their space. So perceptual, whenever there is deficit in these areas, they have impaired social language, poor language skills, they have motor and host upset, and they have problems with their motor system, and this results to hosting of many symptoms in it. So the child actually is tagged as not being attentive or lazy in class, but there are reasons why he is tagged so. So whenever there are deficits, the only way where they find a way to compensate is their behavior. So two walking, as I explained, flicking fingers near their face, flapping of the hands, they are responsible for providing additional sensory input to tell the individuals that they are aware, like they are actually in the space. So whenever you see a patient, we should we should not just see the things that relates to his sight or even if you see with the accommodative visual efficiency part, but then we have to consider their behavioral as well to find out a clue that this child is having a visual deficit. So this is a very nice picture which shows the various hierarchy of your treatment protocol. So whenever you see a patient, you have to make sure his eye health or visual pathway is intact. Once you find it or put a tick mark on this, that is visual system or visual pathway is not impacted, you go towards his visual efficiency. You have to take care of his oculomotor skills, his fixation skills, and then once his burdens and accommodation is taken care of, then you move towards the visual information processing. And then inside the visual information processing, we have so many of his skills that has to be considered. Once the visual information skills are then corrected, he will have a life that is very rich with school, very rich in terms of academics, or he will do his best in sports or in work, or with all the activities that relates with his life. So all these activities again are broadly dependent upon his central and peripheral awareness. So what happens in children with all these behavioral issues are they are more towards the central or their focal system is more activated while their ambient system is closed. So we have to work on their peripheral vision. So whenever you think as a parent or as an eye practitioner, where you get individuals with all these issues, you have to make sure they are visually ready. If they are not ready, there is a good news that vision can always be developed. You see in this, we are working in the first picture, we are working on their perceptual deficits. Here we are working on their Burgen's skills. Here we are working with their suppression part, which again is into the binocularity. Here we are working into their vestibular thing. So there are a lot of ways where vision can be developed. As we know, vision encapsulates so many of things that has to be considered. The next is vision can be relearned. This famous lady is Sui Berry. She is one of the neuroscientists. She wrote a book, Fixing My Gaze, at the age of 50. All this while she underwent so many of surgeries and she was not able to fix her vision. But then when she saw a developmental optometrist, and even if she was aged 50, she could get her three-dimensional vision or stereopsis back. So this says that age is not a bar for you to achieve a three-dimensional vision or to enjoy the fruits of a perfect vision. There is another book written by Clark Elliott. He is also a scientist or a professor of artificial intelligence. His life changed after an accident where he had a concussion. So post concussion, how he got his vision back, he has explained in this book, The Ghost in My Brain. It's a very nice book. If you have time, please go through this. And if at all your vision are proper, it can again be enhanced, like in sport vision therapy, where you work in your eye-hand coordination, your Burgen's. Even a small phobia is so much detrimental to you working perfectly in your area of interest in sports. So this is a man, Larry Fitzgerald, who is one of the winner of All-Pro wide receiver. So this man had his grandfather as a developmental optometrist. So he was, even if he had a problem of dyslexia early in his life, he was treated, and that's how he was able to give his level best in sports. So this again, you can just Google about him and get to know how he achieved all the success in his area of interest in football. So even if like this actually for enhancement, we actually work for those who are involved with sports or with particular area of their work. Let us suppose if you find someone who is good at skiing, you can work with their foot coordination, eye-hand coordination, everything relates with vision. So their balance, everything is taken care of through sports vision therapy. So these are the evidence. Even if like through all this explanation, if you are still not convinced that vision can be relearned or enhanced or relearned, there are evidence of effectiveness of vision therapy, where like I have mentioned even in the reference, you can later go through it. These are the evidence that highlights how eye movements get better with vision therapy, how the accommodative deficits can be taken care of vision therapy, how in patient with convergence insufficiency, how the patient had good quality of life out of vision therapy, how in strabismus and neurorehabilitation vision therapy is helping their best. So in a special population, again, I have mentioned all these differences. So these are the evidence that says that with developmental optometry, you can bring the best in the child, which are even tagged or which are mislabeled as different with the different names. So what is your role as an optometrist? So if you see a patient who are found to have problem with their behavioral issues, it's the high time that you at least should be aware of the adaptive techniques that is required to handle the patient objectively. The first need of you as a practitioner. The second is you have to appropriately address the need of the population, and you have to give your best to bring upliftment in their quality of life, and you are morally, legally, and ethically bound to support these people through referrals if you are not able to do your best in that, or you have to administer rehabilitative therapies in this. So what is the I want to highlight what is the actual need of mediating with other professionals. Let us suppose if you see a patient with cerebral palsy, it's not just that they have problem with their physical stuff, like their tonicity is impaired, their muscular posture is impaired. So it's just because you get them into physiotherapy doesn't help them much. So getting them into vision therapy, we can work on their moments. As we said, vision is responsible for all the 4 parts as explained by Skeffington's principle. With the help of ambient prism and all, we can work on the posture as well. So it is very much essential to have a multidisciplinary approach to retraction while you take care of your patient. So having a CP patient, you can work with his physical stature with the physiotherapist. You can work on his vision part or his perceptual deficits or with his balancing and everything with vision therapy. His speech will obviously impaired, so you can work with the speech therapist. And then he will obviously have sensory problems, and these sensory problem is mediated through occupational therapists. So again, it is very much challenging to take care of a patient with special needs, and we really need a great patience to work with these kids. So as a practitioner, we have to make sure that we can help them uplift their life, quality of life through any of the means, either through referrals or administering therapies through them. So these are my references that I have used while making this presentation. So thank you for your patience. So I'll be okay with taking any questions, Kapil.
Yes, Didi, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I'm so mesmerized with your how you presented and how much you have. And obviously, we'll take some questions. If anybody has the questions, please pop in the chat box. You can unmute yourself and go for the question. Okay. Let's start with the first question. Okay. So, Alok Kumar Karna sir is saying, I don't agree.
Hello, can you hear me? I guess my net is a little weaker here. Hello?
Size.
Hello, Kapil?
Yes, Didi, yes. Can you hear
Actually,
us, Didi?
your voice was interrupted a little while ago.
Correct.
Can you?
Okay.
This
Okay,
was
I'll
a question
verify the
by
question, no
Alok
problem.
Kumar Khanna, right? I don't agree with
Yes, yes.
with that line. The font size hampers student academic growth. That is more due to academic development of students since the childhood. So what actually happens with the as I mentioned, like while we wear kids, or even if you see books with kids, you see font size, right? So it doesn't demand lot of accommodation because the font size is quite bigger. But as you grow up, the font size again gets changed to smaller size. So it requires a greater efficiency. The spacing thing, everything has to be considered because as we grow up, the books will have a smaller spaces as well. So that again is responsible, is a part of visual spatial skills, which is again like while we are into smaller grades or small, the books of smaller grade doesn't, they have good spacing as well, and even the font size is better. So this is like, I didn't mean like this is the sole factor for them having problem, but then this also contributes to them having a problem in like in their academics. So I guess I addressed his question.
Yep. Okay. I guess there is the Manish Dahal sir giving the answer. It's logic. So if anybody want to read the Manish sir answer, please
I'll
go
better read myself.
chat.
So
Yeah.
Manish says it does, Alok sir. Kids with uncorrected refractive error will never have a problem with reading when the font size is bigger. Once the font size is small, kids might face difficulty with reading, which will directly impact academic performance. Besides refractive errors, saccades, pursuits, and overall visual processing plays a role. Nicely said, Manish. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
So it's not just accommodative skills, because as we grow up, you need to comprehend the text. Again, the comprehension part is taken care by visual processing skills or visual information processing skills. He is perceptual. If he has any deficits, again, you will have a problem in understanding what he read out of it. Just simply reading out doesn't help. Reading and then comprehending the text is important. So Jagdish Sahani sir said, and is an optometrist, how to test visual perceptual skills in precision. So we have various tests that that are responsible for that can be used for finding out the perceptual skills. So we have a test for visual perceptual skills that is responsible for finding out the perceptual skills in children. So if it is we have this motor free as well as something that associates with motor part also. So there are different types of tests that is solely meant for checking out or finding out the perceptual skills in children. So it's if at all they are preschoolers, like whenever we have limitations, like they are not able to find out what actually it is, then we have other ways where we can find out with their behavioral ways as well. Ajit sir said, great presentation. I just I want you to speak something how you are going to screen such population in society. So Ajit sir, like what actually is that whenever we see population with special needs, it's not like we go with the protocol the same protocol that we have for a general population. So because these populations have behavioral issues and most of them are non-verbal, then we have a research that actually is so much vocal with how do you test people with special needs. So I can even help with forwarding that research to you, or there are ways which is actually meant only for those populations. So even if they are non-verbal, we have ways like let us suppose if you have to check visual vision of those patients, if they are not able to respond to the visual charts that we have, we can use Lia symbol chart, or we can ask their parents to teach what these symbols are and then later use it for Lia symbol charting. So there are so many ways where each areas of the visual system is taken care of through special ways. So I can forward you that article as well, sir. Jagdish Sahani sir says, how color can Yes, Kapil.
Yes, you can proceed. I'm just trying to read out question for you. You are reading the no problem.
So how color can influence in eye brain processing? So again, this is uh, like there are so much of research that is evident, like whenever we have problem with behavioral issues, colored overlays can help just with the figure ground thing and with the backgrounds as well. So it's not that your focal vision is just because your focal vision is responsible for finding out a sharp acuity out of color and visual acuity, but then your peripheral system is responsible for finding out what actually is there in the periphery. So what I meant is eye brain process. So what I mean is all the information processing skills, again, as I said, is broadly classified or broadly presented with your peripheral and central integration. So whenever any of these is impacted, more preferably the peripheral one, the child is again having problem. So Manish says, wonderful presentation, Asmita. A child is born with visual hunger. Vision development continued throughout the life. Age and developmental optometrist. What can optometry do, and what can parents do to ensure that the child development is taking place? So this is wonderfully asked, Manish. So is an optometrist or is a parent of the child, we have to make sure that the developmental milestone that is associated with the child, like right from his birth to the point where he grows up, we have to see if there is his milestone are achieved or not. So if there is any deficit in, or if there is any problem in achieving the milestone, you will obviously found to have a problem. The second thing what you have to consider is, even if you do not see any obvious behavioral issues or any problem with the child, you have to have an eye examination that ensures all his visual properties, right from his vision, is in sight, or his visual efficiency and all the visual information processing skills, his all the areas of development is encapsulated by Skeffington's theory. You have to check that. So once you consider all these areas, and if he is found to have deficit in any of these areas, you should seek a help of a developmental optometrist. So that is how you can ensure your child is doing his best, or whatever he is learning is optimum from the vision that he has gained. So Mr. P is asking, in learning disabilities as well as dyslexia children, while assessment of motor evaluation circuits and pursuit, which test would you like to suggest, NSUCO or DM? So is asked by P, it depends like how far his cognition skills are. Let us suppose if he is not able to read out the letters that is in DEM, I'll better prefer to go NSUCO. And if he is cognitively able, then I'll better choose for DEM. So there are other tests where even if they are not able to do any of these, we have other infrared system where like we can actually find out the latency of all these circuits and pursuits. In Down syndrome, why blepharitis is common? Please explain. As I explained, Sony, like in case of Down syndrome, they are relatively prone to have dry skin. So that is why they are. That is actually the dry skin is actually congenital. They are found to have dry skin. That is why they are blepharitis is most common. In this area, there is a poor sight word recognition. Then how can we improve visual? Saurabh Kalsi says, So whenever they have problem with sight word recognition, again, as I said, there are a lot of areas, not just with recognition, some areas that has been found deficit because of not having a proper visual skills. It's not that they will be corrected 100%, but then the efficiency that they gain out of the perceptual therapies or the problem that is associated with, they will for sure get better with the case. So it's not that we can treat the problem 100%. Autism or any other behavioral issues or any other reading disabilities, we can't treat them 100% because there is always a part where it is best. But being a practitioner, what we have to think is we have to give utmost out from our profession. How is William filter works in dyslexia patient? So these filters are responsible for, again, actually they work, these dyslexic patients, they have a problem in the language acquisitions, right? So these are responsible for working with the figure ground thing. So whenever you put color overlays over there, the amount of light that goes inside your eyes is again like you actually cut off the light or you actually highlight the background and you focus on the words there. So this is how they work it, but I'm not very sure with how actually the physiology, how it works, but then I assume this is why the figure ground thing has to be taken care of. That is how the filter works. From special population therapy, from what point do you prefer to start? What will be your first skill? What will we focus? I mean sequencing of therapy. So let us suppose if I get a special, if I get a child with special needs, we see the behavioral aspects first. So whenever they come, as we get into them for correction, we find all the visual abnormalities that relates with his behavior is taken into consideration. Let us suppose if he has any refractive error, we get it corrected. His accommodation deficits, everything is corrected by the help of lens first in the first time, and then when they are into that, we simultaneously take them into vision therapy, where we work on their fixation skills first. Once we go with the monocular part, and then we take into consideration for binocular activities. So we take care of the eye movement part first. Once the eye movement part is okay, we work with the visual efficiency, and then once the visual efficiency is taken care of, we go towards the perceptual part. So that is how we sequence. Color vision will help inform perception. So without color, you will be having problems in recognizing the front. Yeah, that's what. Suresh, how we gonna find a person is having a problem with visual motor integration? If we are doing a mass screening, is there any kind of a specific test? So we have for motor integration, we have a test called Very Book-Technica visual test for visual motor integration. So if you do not have an access of these test plates, what you can do is you can simply ask a child to let us suppose you draw a picture and ask the child to copy it. Let's suppose if they have any perceptual deficits of finding out a problem, finding out what actually is the one that you have just drawn, they will obviously they will have a problem in copying it out. So whenever you see they have problem with visual motor integration, they will not be able to copy what actually is there. So what happens in Very Book-Technica test is you'll have the test plate that has certain figures in it, and the child or the individual is supposed to copy whatever he sees. If he has any problem, then this problem is we work on the integration visual motor part, and we correct them. Purab Dalal says, wonderful presentation, or never learned about visual processing in so much detail till now. Thank you. Jagdish Sahani, how temperature affect on visual perceptual skills? As of now, I'm not very aware how actually temperature affect on visual perceptual skills. I'm sorry, I can get back to the same question later. I'm not aware how temperature is apparently related with visual perceptual skills. Somrit Singh says, do the astronauts develop space dyslexia and zero gravity? As the few books that I have read, they say like they will have a thing. I'm not very aware of the same word, but then they will have a problem with the perceptual part where they think they are actually floating in, even if they are in the earth after coming from. This is actually I read a book from an astronaut, like his wife is a developmental optometrist, and like in that book it said that he used to have problem if after the space visit he used to have problem with the floating part. He used to, like the way we have jet lag, the same sort of space lag or something. The very proper term I'm not very aware. So that's all, I guess. The question is done. Thank you for the patience. So
Yes,
I guess we are
excellent.
done.
Thank you,
Okay.
Didi. Yes, Didi. Thank you so much.
So
You are
actually in this slide, because this area is so much big, I could not cover how to test with the primitive reflex part, or how do you actually go with the optometric examination of this sort of population. So in your future we can go with that, but then for now we are actually working. I mean I actually presented only with the basics of vision therapy. I hope it did help all of you.
Yes, Didi. It helped a lot to us. And okay, I guess you tired because you are presenting since 1.5 hours continuously
That's
speaking.
okay. That's okay. It
Okay,
was such a
thank you
good
so much.
good time having you all here. Thank you all for your patience and your time. Thanks, Kapil, for providing me a platform to share my ideas.
Yes, Didi, we are thankful for you. And okay,
Okay.
so I guess okay, we are about the end of the presentation. So we had discussed many of the queries as well. So we are about the end of the presentation. I guess it would be better if we end the presentation because our sister get tired since 1.5 hours. Thank you so
Okay.
much once again, all of you, for attending the
You're
today
welcome,
webinar.
Kapil and our whole team. Thank you all.
Thank you, Didi. Thank you so much. Okay, Didi.
Okay.
Okay.